Now I'm going to show you how I transfer my design to my watercolor paper. So here is my design that I sketched up on my Bristol sheet. Okay. Then I took my tracing paper and I placed it over it and I traced out the design. So I'm going to set my graphite paper aside. And then this is the paper we're going to use, a 100% cotton, 140-pound arches. And this one is cold press. I'm not much of a fan of hot press. It's just a little bit too smooth for me. I like some texture to my paper. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get my design on here correctly, exactly where I want it. Now this paper I think is a 10 by 14. Yes, 10 by 14 block. So I did go ahead and tape it off with my artist tape because we will be putting in a background, so I wanted a nice clean edge. But I can see I missed a line on my tracing. Let's take a look. Yeah, right here, I missed that line there. I didn't bring it connected all the way down, so we'll line that back up. That looks right. Grab my pencil. So you always want to be looking at your tracing, make sure you've got everything on there. That's real important. And now as I do this, I want to make sure I get it lined up just like it was. There we go. So I want to make sure that that's on there. I want to connect that one. So that's what I noticed was missing just by glancing at it. All right, that looks better. So let's go ahead and get this right where I want it. Now, if you're going to set your design up, you always need a see-through ruler and a piece of your transfer paper. Now I always kind of eyeball it right to left, and then I make sure the top to bottom is where I want it. I'm always going to have a little bit more space down here than I am up here. Not a lot. I always do at least a ½ an inch though. So I take my ruler and I do right to the edge of the paper, and then I go to the furthest part of the design out there, and it's just the first line over 2. That's why these see-through rulers come in really handy. I need to move it over to the right just a tad, not much. Let's try it like that. Might have moved it a little bit too much, but we'll see. No, actually that's perfect. So I've got it where I want it, top to bottom and to the sides. I'm going to take my tape, artist tape. You don't ever want to use masking tape. I always want to keep my tape away from the design because you don't want to have to worry about going over. But you want to do one on the side and one on the top at least, just to hold it in place. Set the tape aside. Now, here's your transfer paper. What you want to do with this is you have a dark side and a light side. So what you want to do with this is make sure the dark side is down, but be careful. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on it or move it around at all, because what happens is this graphite will transfer onto the watercolor paper. That's what it's made to do. All right, so I've got this on here, and I'm going to gently move it to where I want it. And we're going to start with the flower up here on top with my red pencil so I can see where I've gone and where I haven't. Now, normally I wouldn't press as hard as I am pressing, but I want you with the camera to be able to see that design on the watercolor paper. So I'm pressing a little bit harder. And the reason you really don't want to press very hard is you can dent your paper. And unfortunately what happens is the water will rush into that dent and make it really dark. So you want to be careful with that. I used to paint in oils on wood, and we had the same problem. You would dent your wood, and then you could see that dent after you were all done painting this beautiful design, and there's this dent in the wood because you pressed too hard. So you just got to be cautious. Okay, so I've got some of that design down, and the reason that I just do two sides is I can pick it up now and take a look, and yes, it is marking it, so we're good. I haven't moved the design at all, so it's still in the same spot, but I did double check myself, and that's something that you want to do as well. I always have my graphite up close at hand. So I can see what each line of design is as I go. And just double check yourself that way too. It works out really well. This is actually the separation between the two petals here. That's what I actually looked at because it kind of looked a little funny as I was putting it in. I redid this design like 3 times because I wanted to get it exactly the way I wanted to for this class. All right. Once I get a full bud like this done, like this flower is done now, then I like to go ahead and make sure I've got the stem in. You don't ever want to do a flower like that without a stem, so I always make sure that I've got that in. And as long as I'm doing stems, I'm just going to go right straight down and do all the stems at once. Okay, so we got the flower and the stems for the flower in on that one. Let's do this flower too right away. We can get that one out of the way. Then we'll start working on leaves. This is going to be a really pretty peachy yellow, orangey type flower. This one's going to be darker than the other one. This will be our center of interest here. There we go. We're getting there. This is actually a design of 2 different flower pictures that I had from my old home before I moved. And I really like the flower on one, but I really like the leaves on the other, so I put the 2 pictures together to make the one design. So I don't have a photograph for you to get, but you'll be able to get a photograph of the completed design. So okay, I finished this bud, I did its stem. Now I'm going to go on to the leaves behind this bud, or the leaf I should say behind this bud. This was actually from a 3rd picture, so there were 3 pictures involved in this design. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you can combine pictures that you've taken, why not? Definitely makes it your design. You won't see it anywhere else out there, which is always nice to have. Just going to follow my line right straight up to this leaf. There we go. I really like this red pencil idea. You can see right where you've been. And if you need to go over something. So I got this leaf and this leaf, and we've got this one and this one and this one. So we actually have 3 more leaves here to do. So we'll do this one next. This is actually going to be a lighter leaf that I'm doing right now because it's forward, more forward in the design. So it'll be lighter in color. It'll attract more attention, which is what I want. There we go. So we got that leaf done. Now this one's kind of unique because this one has holes in this leaf. These 3 holes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put those in. Normally I don't do a lot of detail on the inside, but with these I'm going to put some biscuit on there. So I want to make sure I know where those holes are. All right, so at this point, I'm not going to remove my tape because I want to keep my transfer right where it was, just in case I need to add something in. But now I'm going to lift it up and check it and make sure I got everything in there. I did not. I need to put that line in, so that's the first thing I noticed. It looks like that's the only one I missed. That's not too bad. Okay, so since I've still got that tape down, I can just slide this back in. And put that on there. So there we go. So we've got our design on there. Let me show you how that looks. See how nice that tape just comes up? There we are. So that's what we're going to do next then. We're going to put the biscuit in and start the painting. I'll talk to you then. In this segment, I'm going to show you how I do the frisket. We're going to paint one of the petals to completion, one of the leaves, and the stems. So what I'm using is just a wipeout tool, they call it. This one's a Master's Touch, doesn't matter. I don't like to use a brush because it will damage the bristles. So I just get the biscuit right out of the jar on the tool. And it feels like I got a lot on there, so I'm just going to put some on each one. And then I'll wipe it off and spread it. So this is so much more convenient. Now I can just wipe this off. If I need to add more, I can. But I want to make sure that this is not real thick and heavy because it will take forever to dry. So all I'm doing is spreading it out, covering those little holes in the leaf. That one I need a little bit more on. All right, there we go. This one too, I think. There we go. Spreading out a little bit better now, the longer it sits on there. Okay, that's that. Not a big deal. And I've cleaned off my tool to be used again the next time I need it. Be sure and cover up your fisket because you don't want that to get old and stale. So now I'm going to set this aside for a minute and I'm going to have you see the colors that we're going to use. I'm going to bring out my palette. Grab my mixing brush here. Now I'm using, since I've already got a little bit of red in this one, I'm going to use it right here. There we go. This is the color that the tulip is going to be, but it's also going to have some yellow. So I'm going to clean out my brush. Wipe it right on my towel there. Get the other one on my lap. And then the first color that I used was Pearl Red Light. Now I'm going to go to Hansa Yellow Light, which is this color. And that's about all the color you want. You don't want a whole lot. I really like it to be more of a peachy color than an orange. Although there will be some yellow on the edges all by itself. I'm going to clean that out again and add some more of the red. But I do want a little bit of yellow in there. I just want it to kind of go towards the peach side. By adding that yellow in there, that's what's going to make this Pearl Red do that. See, I still feel that I need some more yellow in there. Not a lot, though. I don't want to go orange, if I can help it. Just about like that. Makes it nice and soft. Peach color. There we go. That's the color I'm looking for right there. It's a peachy color. Okay, so that's the color we're going to use on the petal. And I'll show you how we're going to apply that. You always want to mix your colors first, so that you're not doing that while your paper is wet, because it will dry too quickly for you. All right, I'm going to pick up a 6, my favorite size brush, but I'm also going to pick up my water brush because we're going to apply water first, and we're going to apply it out of the little jar that's got the blending in it, blending medium in it. So I'm going to saturate that brush really well, and we're going to start up here on this petal. Now, since this paper's never ever been wet before, I'm going to put down water. I'm going to let it soak in for a little bit, and then I'll add some more water because I want to make sure this paper is completely saturated in this area so that this paint will flow the way I want it to. Okay, now I'm going to just lift this up so I can see, yeah, still need some up here, right, and you can kind of spread the water out. Make sure that you don't have any puddles, but you do want to make sure that you've covered the petal that you want to work on. That looks good. Now we're going to let that soak in for a minute. clean out my brush just to be safe. All right, I'm going to add just a little bit more water here now that that first amount has soaked in. And I'm just going to tilt it one more time, and that looks good. So now I've got my brush clean. I've got the blending and glazing medium on my brush. And I'm just going to pick up the color that we mixed. I'm turning my brush in the puddle to pick up a fairly good amount. Now see how this is just blending outward. This is exactly what I wanted this to do. So I'm really thrilled with that. Now I'm not going to go right to this edge because I'm going to add some yellow there. But see how soft and peachy that color is? It's not really an orange and it's not really a red. It's kind of a peach, and that's what I was looking for. So I'm thrilled with that. I'm just laying the color in for now. I'm going to let the water do its thing for me. I am going to bring it right up to this edge though, because I want color right up to that edge. That'll be my dark edge. The light's going to be coming in from the upper right. There we go. I'm going to let this set up for a second. I want to make sure I got it right to that line. Then I'm going to add some more of that same color right to this edge, because this is going to be our darkest edge. And it softens as it comes to the right. So that's perfect. You want to do this while it's still wet. You don't want to let it dry too much, because then the paint is not going to move in. The water is going to be too dry. So it won't have the opportunity to move across as it's doing right now, which is perfect. All right. Now I'm also, as long as I have that wet still, and that's another reason that I like it being double loaded with water like that. I'm taking the Hansa Yellow Light. I added just a touch of the peach, and I'm going to add this color on this edge. And what's nice about this, while it's still wet, but yet it's not really soaking wet like it was when I added the first peach, is these will blend together. I won't have to do a whole lot to get them to blend together. They'll just blend together on their own, which is nice. Take this right down to this edge. Now I'm just touching them together. Just touching the peach as I go. And that's another reason I added the peach into the yellow. First of all, I very seldom paint right from the tube. In other words, I don't use colors that are not blended with something else. They're a little harsh, and it can look a little stark on your painting. So I always like to take the color that's next to it and blend it in. Okay, so what that's done is a couple different things. It brought the highlight in over here, first of all, so that's the light's coming in from that area. And I do want to get a little bit more peach down in this area. It's not quite so bright down here. And then it's allowing all these colors to blend together all on their own with the water. So that's kind of nice too. Works out really, really well. There we go. So this is our highlight, the majority of the highlight. Right there. And that's nice because that being the center of interest, this area right next to it is going to be very dark because that's the petal in the back that's kind of peeking through, and down here is the petal in the back. So that works out really well. I'm going to kind of blend this a little bit better here. There we go. Dry my water brush out a little bit, so I just cleaned it. Okay. There we go. All I did was blend that in a little bit better. Okay, so we've got some really nice things going on with that. I'm going to just let that set for a minute, and we're going to move on. I'm going to bring this up here out of the way, and I'm going to show you what I'm doing with my palette. I'm going to grab my blending brush. This will be our green area. There we go. Now we're going to use Phthalo Blue to make our green. Isn't that pretty? It's just gorgeous. And we're going to do a stem next, so that's where we're headed here. So good, I got my blue down. And again, I'm blending my colors first before I do anything to the next area. And all I did was take that Hansa yellow light and add it into the phthalo. And look at the beautiful greens that it makes. And if you understand color theory, this is the correct color green that you want for that peach. All right. So this is going to be our stem, but I do want a darker green too, so we're going to add a little bit more on the edge. And I'm going to take just a touch of that red too and darken it. There we go. Now we're getting a darker green. So we basically have our highlighter light green. And then this will be our darker green. go. So the colors that I used on that were the Phthalo Blue, Hansa Yellow Light, and then a touch of the Floral Red, and it created this darker green for us. So this is going to be our stem colors, which will work out really nice. So I'm going to take my water brush. This is drying out really well up there. That's good. So we don't want to do anything else to that until it's dry. And we're going to start with our stem. So I'm loading with my water brush just the blending and glazing medium right down that stem. We're going to go right into this leaf here. There we go. All right, we're going to let that set up for a minute, and then we'll add some more water to it. Perfect. All right. So we'll set that aside for right now. I'm also going to set aside my 6 brush, and I'm going to drop down to a 4. If I can find it. It's got to be U. Yep. So I'm going to pick up the lighter color first and load my brush, and I always twirl it to a tip. I'm going to set this color in. The water's still really wet, so that's good. Kind of let it go where it needs to go. All right. I'm going to clean out my brush and pick up the darker color. Twirl it to a tip. Go right down the dark side. Let these colors blend together. Okay. I want to make sure it goes right to the edge. If you do happen to have a puddle of water there, just dry your brush off and pick it up. It acts just like a sponge. So there we go. I want to add just a little bit more color at this bottom here. It's going to be a dark area. You can't add any more color in if it's drying out, but this is still wet enough. See how it's accepting that color? Perfect. And I do want to get it a little darker up here too, as there's always a shadow. Okay. So we're going to let that dry. That's still damp, so I'm going to let that dry some more. Set that aside. We're going to do some blending. I'm going to put this one away and go back to my 6 because the leaf that we're going to work on is a little bit bigger. But we're going to mix some colors for that larger leaf. And now it is a lighter leaf. The ones behind it are much darker. So I just cleaned out my mixing brush. I added in some of the blending and glazing medium. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up the yellow. And that's going to be pretty much the mainstay. I'm going to take some of this darker green and bring it in to the yellow. Grab some more water. There we go. This will be the highlight for that leaf. And then the color that we used for the highlight on the stem is going to be the dark color, because that's going to be the lighter leaf. All right. So I got my colors mixed that I want to use. A drop of water on there, so I want to pick that up right away. And I'm going to grab my water brush, fill it, and start loading some water onto the front leaf here that we're going to paint. You want to get this area up here wet too. That's all part of the same leaf. So it kind of gives its twists and turns and makes it so pretty of a design. Alright, just lift it up. I can see right here is a spot that's dry. Just going to sweep it around to make sure it's all covered. There we go. Alright, so we're going to let that set up for a second. And I'm going to reload my brush. And add some more water in. This paper is really thirsty when it's brand new like this. You don't want your petal drying out. It's a fairly large petal. Alright, so now we're going to pick up our darker color first. Since the light's coming in this direction, this stem down the middle, or vein down the middle, is actually going to be darker towards the bottom. So I'm picking up my dark color. And I want to drop that in first, so right underneath here it's going to be a little darker. So I'm going to apply that. And then I'm looking at my graphite. This area is going to be darker. Picking up some more color. And this area is going to be darker. Now also there's a dip right here, so I want this to be darker. Yeah, and it's actually going to go right across the middle here. It's darker. And then this dip over here I want to be a little darker, not much. Okay, clean my brush. Oh, I missed one dark area. This is darker. now I can add in the yellows, or the lighter color. So the tip is lighter. This coming over the top of the back is lighter. This area will be lighter. And again, we're just letting them all blend together because of that water that we laid down. Break that up just a little bit there. Okay. All right, looking good. Just softening those two colors together just by re-tapping them. There we go. So we're going to let that dry. Okay, we've got everything nice and dry. So we're going to go ahead at this point in time then and use our eraser. I'm using the Faber-Castell white, and I'm going to just remove, while everything's nice and dry, gently the tracing lines on here. So if you get any more paint on there, you won't be able to remove them. So you want to, I'm going to get my pencil because I can get it in there a little bit easier and make sure it's nice and clean on the tip next to that yellow. Sometimes the white eraser is just a bit too big. And again, you want to do this nice and gentle. You don't want to stress the paper. It sounds worse than it is. But you don't want to build that color up too much on there. You won't get that off. So it's important to remove it after the first wash of color. All right, so we got that one off. Let's get this off. Up one side and then up the other. I keep twirling the pencil around so it gets to a clean edge. Make sure we get that all off of there as best we can. Okay, now we're going to work on the leaf. This just works out so nice. It doesn't remove the paint, but it does remove that line, which is good. All right. And with that first layer of wash in there, you can kind of tell the outside of this leaf anyway, or petal or stem. And it just looks so much cleaner. You don't want to have to worry about covering it up. Okay, so I got all of the eraser mess off of my paper because I don't want to get that into my watercolor painting. So good. We're done with that for right now. Now, the next thing we want to do is I'm going to take the blending and glazing medium. I'm going to show you the background, but before we put that on there, I'm going to take and mix the sky or the background color. And I'm going to take my little water droplet here. Get some of that blending and glazing medium in here. We'll start out like that. Got a little bit of green in that brush yet. Let's get that out of there. Which isn't going to hurt anything because I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to this anyway, not much. I want this to be a pretty pale background mix, so one little dab of that yellow is all we really needed. And just tone down that blue, which would be blaringly bright all by itself. There we go. Clean out that brush a little bit better this time. Aha, that's better. Let it dry. All right, so now I've got my watercolor brush loaded with the water and the blending and glazing medium. And we're going to apply that to the background first. So I'm going to turn this so I can see it a little bit better as I do this. And I want to do it right up against this petal. And I'm just going to do a portion of it. I'm not going to do the entire background. I just want you to see how I do it. And you always want to put down water far and beyond where you want the paint to stop, because you don't want any hard lines. You have to become pretty fast with watercolors at times. If you do end up with hard lines, you want to go back in with a clean brush and just water and soften them away. Now I'm using the blending and glazing medium on this. Like I said, I've gotten really used to using this. I really like it. And the black on the backgrounds, it's almost a must. Just don't want any hard lines. You want it nice and soft. Okay, so I'm going to set my water brush aside. Got my 8, and I think that'll be just right for this background. I don't think I need that big pointed one. I'm just going to pick up the color, twirl my brush to a point, and go away from the edge of the water because I don't want that to dry hard. Pull it right up to the petal. So I'm just smoothing it out over that water. Now we're going to let that set up for a minute. And again, this is just the partial background. I'm not doing the whole part of it, but I'll be able to add to this without an issue. I'm going to just let this set up for a second. Let some of that water soak in. Clean my brush. While I'm waiting on that to dry a little bit, I'm going to take my, it's a number 4, let me see, I should have a number 6 right here, yeah. My clean number 6, just regular water. I'm just going to soften these lines right here. I just don't like the way those kind of went in. I'm not going to be adding a ton of lines on this tulip petal, but some. So what I'm doing is just making a puddle of the reddish color. I don't want this to go right to the outside edge because I don't want it to seep into that blue I just laid down. I just want to soften out those lines. There we go. Now I'm going to soften it just a little bit in this direction, not much. I just don't want it to be a hard line. There we go. Okay. And now I'm going to clean the brush again, wipe out most of the color, or the water I should say, and then I'm going to soften this line. And take it right up to that yellow. Again, I just don't want a hard line there. There's a real quick directions on how to do a wet on dry to create that softness. And we're just going to soften that in all the way up to there. Okay. Now, that background color, I'm going to pick up, without any water in my brush, the background mix. I'm just going to add it in closer to the petal because I want it to be a little bit darker there. See how it's still blending out? Just want a different shade there. And a little bit darker. I'm going to clean my brush, soften that outside edge. And I'll probably end up, when I'm finishing the rest of the background, I'll probably darken that at least 2 more times. That's because I want that to be noticeably darker right up against the petal. But you want to build your color gradually as you go. Okay, that's great. That worked out well. Now, I'm going to just turn this around, let that dry, because it looks like it's going to be good. That petal is drying. Let's go ahead and work on the stem. Now, since we've got that background color here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how I'm doing it, is just mix a darker stem color. So we've got the blue in here, and just going to pick up some more green, or yellow, I'm sorry, so it'll turn a little bit more green. I want it to be fairly dark in comparison to what's there. So I'm going to pick up even a little bit more blue. And I'm going to just add a touch of the red, because that will darken it. See how it darkened it almost immediately? Okay, it's the color I want. I add just a touch more blue. I want it a little bit darker. It's going to blend it all in. And I'm going to try it on my scrap paper here. See, that might not be dark enough, so let's add a little bit more red in there. And I'm not going to be doing any more background, so I can just take this blue and add that in. It's probably going to take me right to the color I want anyway by doing that. You always want to use a mixing brush because you don't want to ruin your good brushes by mixing with them. You get paint up in the ferrule up here, and then you're wasting a really good brush for no reason, when you can do it with a inexpensive, actually I just have a acrylic brush, I think, here that I'm using. That's better. That's a better color. Alright, clean that out real quick, let it dry. Wipe it on my cloth baby diaper. Alright, now let's see how that color looks. Yeah, that's going to be better. That's darker. Perfect. Alright, so I'm going to move this back in place. I have a number 2, because I want to run this right down the left-hand side of that stem. Now this is dry on wet, so the background has not had any water added to it, and that's what I want, because I want this to show up a little bit better. Adding in a shadow here, right underneath that stem. Reload, bring my paintbrush to a point as I reload, and bring it right down. Now I want a little bit of a shadow here as well, not much, but a little bit darker, so I want to make sure that that represents that it's going behind that leaf. Okay. So now that we've got that laid in, let's soften it. Anytime you lay wet on dry, Unless you want a real hard line, you're going to have to go back and soften it in. And that's what I'm doing here. And it's just helping move that paint right across that stem. Now I'm going to turn it around and apologize for the movement. But as long as we have this set up this way, I want to get this side in as well. And this one's just going to be pretty much a straight line. I will go back and soften it because I don't want it to have a inside hard line like right here. So now that's covering too much of the stem for me all the way down, so I'm going to just remove some of that paint and get my highlight back. You want a completely dry brush. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my brush right into my baby wipe or my baby towel and completely drying it. It's just damp, that's all it is. But you have to have less moisture in your brush than what you have on the paper to be able to pick that color up. Now that looks pretty good, so we're going to leave that be and let that set up as well as up here. Some of this is coming in, so I'm just going to push it back with a clean damp brush. We got to put a dark line against this anyway, so it's really not going to matter. But that did that. Okay, I do want to soften this out here a little bit better. Perfect. All right, now let's start to work on that leaf. And this leaf does not have a whole lot of marks going this way, but we're going to put some in there. And whenever I do those, I like to make sure I have clear water down because it softens them and makes them very pretty. So I'm going to put that down just as if I were going to do another complete wash of color on here. I just keep picking up water with the blending and glazing medium in it and adding it to the leaf. And I do want some up here a little bit more, so we're going to put that up there. Now, I'm just going to pick this up and see where we're at with water. I've got it completely covered and I don't. So you always want to check it. You want to have a fairly good amount of water. Reason being is when you put these lines in here, veins, or if you want to call them veins, or you want to make sure they're soft, and by having the water in there, they are soft. Now while that's wet, I am going to pick up my eradicator brush, which is just a flat. I use a bright because it's a little stiffer and I like that. I'm just going to go in and remove and create some of the highlights as well. Now you might have to do this 3-4 times to get that effect that you're looking for. Stand it right up on its edge. There we go. Now it's working. And bring that down. It's going to be very gentle. put some of those darker veins in there. And I'm going to use the same mix that we did for the stem. I'm going to add just a touch of yellow to it, not much. It's because that leaf isn't quite the same color as the stem, and you don't want it to be. Alright, so I've loaded my brush, brought it to a point, and with the water in there, it's going to go right up the center. Kind of got a sappy green color here, which is good. Bring it right up to the top. That's one. There's two. See how they're softening away, which is good. Fix it as you need to as you go, and that's another good thing about that water and blending medium, because you can pretty much fix it. I think we just need one more over here. There we go. You don't want them to be the same length. You don't want them to be the same width. You want them to look a little different, each one. Now I'm going to just leave that and let that dry.